you say?
That's kind of late. That's too easy.
Queen of beauty and courage.
The king of Persia, who had overthrown Babylon, decided to help rebuild the temple back in Jerusalem. He even returned all of the gold and silver that the Babylonians had stolen from the temple. Before the temple was even finished, the Israelites began to offer sacrifices and worship God once again. The opposition continued, this time from a man named Tatanai, the governor of a nearby region. He wanted to stop the Israelites from building and worked to convince the Persian king Darius to stop the Israelites. Not only did King Darius not stop the rebuilding project, he threatened Tatanai and anyone else who would try to stop the temple from being rebuilt, that he would kill them. So the work continued, and almost 70 years after it had been destroyed, the Israelites finished rebuilding the temple. God was once again worshipped in Jerusalem. The Israelites left Babylon, many returning to Jerusalem, and some heading to surrounding countries. An Israelite named Mordecai moved to a country called Susa with his adopted daughter Esther. While they were there, the king of Susa, Xerxes, was looking for a woman to become queen. Young women from all over Susa, including Esther, were brought to live in the king's palace and go through a year of beauty treatments before the king would make his selection. When Esther finally got to meet King Xerxes, he was attracted to her more than any of the other women. So Xerxes placed a crown on Esther's head and made her queen. But Esther did not tell him that she was an Israelite, also called a Jew, because Mordecai asked her not to, fearing his reaction. One day, Esther's father, Mordecai, was sitting near the king's gate and overheard two of the king's officers planning to kill the king. So he warned Esther, and Esther told King Xerxes. The king's life was saved, and the two men were executed. Shortly after, King Xerxes promoted one of his men, named Haman, to a position higher than all the other officials. He commanded everyone to bow down as Haman entered each day through the king's gate, but Mordecai refused. When Haman saw this, he was furious and even more angry when he found out from some of his officials that Mordecai was an Israelite. So he looked for a way to kill not only Mordecai, but all of the Israelites living in Susa. He convinced King Xerxes to declare a law stating that all Israelites living in the region would be killed on a specific day because they would not follow the king's laws. When Mordecai heard about the law, he tore his clothing and wept bitterly. He convinced Esther to go before the king, revealed that she was an Israelite, and asked the king to spare her people. There was one problem. No one, not even the queen, was allowed to come before the king uninvited. If they did, they risked being put to death. But Esther was brave and approached the king, who asked, "What is your request?" Esther said that she wished for the king to host a banquet and to make sure that Haman, the man who wanted to kill the Israelites, was there. At the banquet, she would make her request known. When the day of the banquet came, everyone, including Haman, was there. The king asked Esther what it was that she wanted. She revealed that she was an Israelite, a Jew, and begged for her own life and the lives of her people. The king was furious with Haman, who had convinced him to create the law and had him arrested and killed. Then King Xerxes not only removed the law to kill the Israelites, but gave all of them living in the region protection and rights. Because of Esther's bravery, the Israelites were spared and even honored.
All right, we'll do 5 minutes of conversation. You're a group online and you're a group here. Twos or threes, make for the best conversation pods. So twos or threes.
I'm behind, so I can't really add to discussion, but I'm willing to listen.
Well, I thought the video left off one item, and that was that the Jewish people could kill the people that were going to kill them. I thought that was interesting that the video didn't say that. But I guess the video is shown to kids, so maybe that's why they might have left that off.
That's possible, yes. I do enjoy the videos, though. It brings it all together nicely.
I'm having trouble getting a view of everyone online. I'm not sure what.
We can hear you, Susan. We see
Oh,
you.
there we go. There we
Yeah.
go. Yeah, I just got unmuted. I'm a little bit out of the view of the frame today, based on where I've got my iPad here. This is a familiar story, and it's one of the few stories, I guess, in the Bible where women had any power and or influence, and yet still one of the I think the reason one of the reasons she was chosen by Xerxes is because of her beauty, but she certainly knew how to use her talents to help her people.
Mm-hmm.
And until I read this story in the study, I was unaware that there was a Jewish holy day honoring the liberation of the Jews in Susa. So that's my comment. One of my favorite Bible books.
Well, I think it's more than beauty. They don't bring this out, but I think there's something about Esther that she either says or how and maybe she's trained to act, and maybe because she was trained in beauty things like, perfume or something. I mean, I can't imagine it takes you a whole year to learn how to be that beautiful, but I think there's something more than beauty. I mean, there's so many beautiful people, but it's the comment that they make or how they make the person that's judging them feel that hasn't really been brought out. I mean, they keep talking about beauty, but I think there's at least, if I'm thinking about a beautiful person and I think there's more to it than beauty. I think it's their, and maybe it's just her personality or something.
Yeah, the way she handles herself, the way her vision, the way she sees things, maybe touched the king.
Back together again. Let's see, so I can hear you. All right. Good. All right. let's share as a group. What were some insights? What are some questions that you had from the chapter?
I will say one thing in the Bible, they don't, it's not King Xerxes, it's King Asherus.
Oh, Ahasuerus or something like that, yeah.
I like Xerxes. Ahasuerus.
Ahasuerus. So they think it's the same, it's the king that was reigning at that time. Goes into that same name, that's the Xerxes. And Artaxerxes is the other one.
I have a question. We talked about a little bit here, on page 282 at the top. It talks about, if Esther had decided not to do this,
Hmm,
then somebody else would have.
huh?
So I was,
Would arise from another quarter, right?
yeah,
Isn't that what it
another
says?
place. But you and your father's family will perish. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting that was this God's will that she, at this time, do what she was supposed to do? And if she didn't, would somebody else do it? That's what it sounds like.
So definitely, that is the most quoted section of Esther. If you've ever been to has anybody ever been to an Esther Bible study?
Oh, no, I was to an Esther play of her in the
Purim.
synagogue.
Yeah.
My Jewish friend invited us because she was Esther.
Oh.
And it was just delightful.
And there's a lot of booze there too.
Well, yeah,
See?
you had to be a little careful.
She's a booze.
But
head.
they beautiful, had the room set up, where there was a stage, and they all had beautiful costumes, and they really exaggerate.
Uh-huh.
And it's the Feast of Purim
Yep.
for the Jews. And there was laughter, and they over emoted when they acted, and the people were just rolling in the aisles.
There's a lot of drinking too. That's
And not before.
no. Well, yeah.
First the play, and then we went to the social room. And, they kept flying, whatever. And wonderful Jewish pastries. And
It's a piece of their.
I've never forgotten it.
Yeah, it's delicious,
I'm
right?
still afraid of it.
So Esther is oftentimes covered in lots of places, but the reason why your question kind of brought it up is this is the section. The one thing, if you notice, that God is not named, right, in the book of Esther, and that's because of that, like all sorts of people, the rabbis didn't like it, Luther didn't care for it, like it's not, it's important that God's actions are named, right? And that's, but the rabbis found a workaround. And it's just that line that you said, that God's specific name isn't named here, but for the rabbinical tradition, they would say that line, that deliverance for the Jews will rise from, and in the biblical one that I know, from another quarter is usually the line. It does say another place in here, but from another quarter is oftentimes. And that is the very rough allusion that God's name is in there, right? And so I don't buy it. I think they're trying to create something out of nothing, but well, there is something there, right? But yeah. So your question was, who would arise then, essentially? So throughout the scriptures, right, there are all sorts of people who are brought up, who are called into the ways, and ultimately, we are called not to look at the individuals that are called into the position, but instead that God is the one that is giving them the gifts to be able to do the ministry or the actions that were done. A rough interpretation of Mordecai's statement here would be that if it's not you, somebody else will do, because God will not abandon God's people, right? And so I'm not so worried about this. If you can't do it, Don't worry about it. Somebody else will do it. Except for you're probably gonna not it, right? So now it's not quite clear. We think Mordecai is probably her uncle. It's not exactly crystal clear in the text. It just as in the scriptures is that her parents died and Mordecai takes care of her. Well, that would make sense in the way that the family structures would have existed, but it's not crystal clear that that's exactly what was happening. But this is a story of a lot of different things then that are brought up. A non-traditional family, right? So if we're looking for family systems and family structures, the Old Testament does not consider the nuclear family that we had in the 50s to be the structure, right? There are people who are raised apart from their families. There are uncles raising, there are guys who are marrying multiple women. There are kids that are abandoned. There are, I mean, it is, as you read through it, if you have a non-traditional family, the Old Testament does not give you, or gives you encouragement, because it doesn't say, this is the way that it had to be, that it should be, right? Everything about that would say opposite. And so that's one of the interesting areas that then we have. And we'll talk about Purim. What else? What other questions? Anything online before I move off of the online?
I got a question on the Queen Vashti.
Ah,
So I guess two questions. One, I found some, well, it's an observation, that she kind of defied the king and lived to tell about it. But the second, there's a reference in there that she was like basically kicked out to the whim of her husband. So I'm like, well, if she was a queen, would she have a husband?
well, she'd have a king.
I mean, a king.
She was no longer queen. And
So you think she got married then after she got?
no, I think she was killed. I mean, it doesn't say that, but the overall line here, right, is that,
So she was supposed at the whim of her husband.
yep.
Such was the precarious state of women and men were imported.
Well, that's true, but back up a line there, right? It isn't necessary. I mean, Xerxes or Ahasuerus, whatever his name is, he is not portrayed as somebody who knows what's going on, right? I mean, he's the ruler of this vast empire and he can't figure out a lot of things, right? And so his buddies essentially say, you can't let this stand. Like, if you let her get away with this, what's gonna happen to our wives? They're gonna think that they have authority and ability to do things. And we can't have that happen, right? And so they thought that's why he gets, off she goes. Yeah, it's not clearly laid out in the scriptures. My hunch is though that, can't have two queens. Well, you could probably have multiple queens, but one ruling queen.
So you think she was put to death at some point?
Yeah, or cast out or something. I mean, it wasn't a good line. And in fact, in Purim, there is a song called Vashti is Right. Did they sing that?
I think so. I
Yeah.
know that there was a bit with her and,
Yeah.
because she was bad.
Yeah, Vashti was right. There's a song, you can look it up. It's funny. But it's,
There was a lot of singing in the play.
yeah. So,
Many opera.
right, at the end of this, they talk about the creation of the Purim, right? And it's the dice that Haman throws. It's called a pur, or pur. It created the time when they were gonna do the elimination of the Jews by the king's decree. And then he reverses. Oh, he doesn't reverse. He adds another thing on top of it, right?
The story of Haman in the pole that he erected to put Mordecai's head on.
Yeah.
That went on.
Didn't work out well.
Yeah, well, we'll get into the parallelism that exists there. So, but Purim is a festival. It's one of the only festivals that exists outside of the in the Jewish faith, outside of the Exodus, right? So all of the festivals that exist in the high holy days tend to revolve around the Exodus, or those first 5 books of Moses, right? And so you think Passover or Sukkot or the other festivals that are celebrated tend to fat. And so, but Purim's outside of that. And so because of that, it's not celebrated by all Jewish folks. Typically a more liberal branches of the Jewish traditions tend to line up with Purim, and the more conservative side do not. Well, and that's part of it, right? Is the drinking part of it is that it doesn't actually happen within this section. Women are freed, yeah. It becomes an issue. But in this telling of the story, and I don't know if this happened in yours, but when the tradition, when you read through Esther, every time that Haman is named, they hiss or they make a sound to blot out his name. So as Haman is named, every time that it comes up in the story, it's a and everybody does it so that his name is blotted out from the story. You could do all sorts of things. You can make all sorts of names, and they dress up as all different things. And usually the whole of Esther is recited in Hebrew, and it's a from one night all the way through to the next night. It's a long celebration. There's good food, some sort of pastry with like jelly in it.
You mean
Jam in
it goes on all night?
It can.
We
It can.
respectfully decline halfway through.
Yeah. So they and for Jewish folks, they celebrate their festivals typically together or in smaller communities, not by themselves. Like how we open our Christmas presents at our house by ourselves or with our closer family. That wouldn't be a part of that. So yeah. So even like Hanukkah is not a huge festival anyway. So. It's only prevalent because we celebrate Christmas in the United States. But Purim is a festival that still exists, and yeah, if you have the chance, like anything, any of the traditions that are celebrated interreligious factions, strongly encourage you to go and be a part of them. So, online, did you have a question? Ron, with your turtleneck on today, you look like a pastor.
Can't get it up. Okay. Didn't Vashti have a son?
I don't know.
Because I don't think Queen Esther, they never mentioned that she has any children. But I thought I had read somewhere that Queen Vashti did have one son.
Oh, that's possible.
So wouldn't that be that? I mean, wouldn't King Xerxes maybe not want to do away with her because she was the mother of his son?
Maybe. I don't.
Maybe. I just,
I don't know if he really is super concerned about that.
We know that was his son.
I think the story I heard is he demoted her. She did have a son, kept her around, but then made someone else queen. He had like multiple wives.
Shocker. Yeah. So let's kind of walk through the text here, and unless there are any other kind of questions or thoughts, anything else to share? So the text happens about 100 years after the exile. It's hard to really place this book. We know that the Persian king is still around. We don't know exactly where all the things are happening, but anyway, they're in Susa, and Susa is the capital of the Persian Empire. So, during third year of his reign, he decides, let's give a big party, right? And he instructs his wine attendants to just go ahead and give everybody what they want, right? So it's a true festival, right? And they navigate that. And so we see that wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different than the other, and the royal wine was abundant and keeping with the king's liberality, right? So this is either a big party or book club that's happening. And so we are, because it's not really book club, it's more wine club than anything else. There's books that are involved, but most book clubs that I know of, at least. So Queen Vashti is to come out and dance. That was usually an understanding that she was not to dance with any clothes on. This was her opportunity to, and he was wanting to show her up. Essentially, is the goal there, and so she says no, right? She's busy. I'm throwing my own party. You do your thing. Am I? So then towards the bottom of page 276, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only as the king, but also against the nobles and the people of the provinces of King Xerxes, for the queen's conduct will become known to all the women. Dun, dun, dun. That's the controversy, right? And there will be, and keep going down there, there will be no end to the disrespect and discord, right? So he deposes her from her position, and thus he sends out folks to go get him a new wife, right?
So he was at least a year without a queen.
Sure, yeah, I mean, because they had to do their beauty treatment. Who wants to go live in a spa for a year? Say hands are up, right? All the
These were-
hot, oiled massages you want.
Yep. These were pampered women. These were
Face mask.
pampered. These were
Yeah.
pampered women. You
Well,
know?
sure, they were going before the king
Isn't
of the
great?
empire. So you imagine that this is interesting. And this is an interesting thing because beauty has changed over the years, right? What we have determined to be beautiful now is not necessarily always been beautiful. So was it a year so that these women could be fed enough so that they looked more beautiful? There's lots of different conversations around what made beauty, what beauty looked like even now. And we still have that conversation, right? And there's organizations like Dove who put on these what does beauty look like kind of conversation. And it blends into this. The last time I was presenting on this, you had to think when you saw Vashti say no, you kind of had to think of the Me Too movement, right? This conversation around how things always happen. The king always got their way. Whatever that creepy guy in Hollywood had his couch. And the funny part about when all that Me Too movement started to break out and become and there would be jokes about Harvey Weinstein that were prevalent. And when they went back, they would look back at all these shows and they would be, this show is worse than Harvey Weinstein's couch. I mean, people would name it at Grammys and things like that. And yet it was consistently happening, right? And not only in Hollywood, outside of the Me Too movement, there was a Church Too movement, if you've heard about that, around women in ministry and the things that they are asked to do or that are said to them, oftentimes for women in ministry. And if you're ever interested, go online. There's a really interesting video around Church Too that was issued by the North Carolina Synod. They had collected statements that women were that were told to women pastors, to female pastors, and then they gave them to men to read while they videotaped them.
So is it church number 2 or TOO?
TOO, yeah. So, but you can just go onto the North Carolina Synod and you've seen the video? Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of extremely sexist statements that were happening and probably still do exist within the church structure. So
Is
it's,
this a Lutheran church?
uh-huh,
Really?
yeah,
So is it Missouri Synod?
no,
No.
yeah. This is within the North Carolina Synod of the ELCA, collected from their female pastors' statements that were made to them. And you can imagine what they say,
So what was the result? Did anything happen?
Then they played that at other places. I think, it's hard to make results happen because a lot of female pastors serve in solo calls. And so there's not like a way that you can support and abide with them other than you can say that, these types of statements are not acceptable to make.
So was there a mass exodus out of the Carolinas of female pastors?
Well, if it is only in the Carolinas, that would make sense, but I mean, these things happen everywhere.
Because they're
And not
women.
just in the Lutheran church.
Right, and not just, well, not all synods and denominations ordain women.
Yeah.
I thought we were more progressive, so that's not really true, or it's, you have to consider the South with a different viewpoint.
I don't think it matters if we're progressive or not. Sexism is still blatantly happening to women in ministry at a pretty rapid rate, even still. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if we could do that very same thing now in Southern Ohio Synod and gather statements that have been made. It's prevalent, and it's a lot of comments on clothes and way that they looks and things like that.
Don't do that with men who are pastors.
It happens less, I would say, but it's not that it doesn't happen. There are one of my stories is that I was gifted a pair of boxers by a member of, that's probably not an appropriate gift to give a pastor. So it was very unclear, and honestly, all I wanted to do was just get out of the room. It was like, I wasn't there to make a statement or a stand. It was just one of those things where I was like, let's keep going. So onward and upward, right? So it happens, but not nearly to the same extent.
So is that age related, do you think? People who were
No.
writing all those things, they were, I want to think, what, the older people in the congregation or older pastors that just don't
shouldn't accept women in the ministry, you know, because at one point that was really new. I just thought that was over.
Yeah, I think that would be nice to say, but from what I understand from my female colleagues around, that is not the case.
I think that's the point of the videos, is to raise awareness that people who might think this is normal, like to say these things, that to say this isn't normal and we're trying to make changes, and it's happening over time, but it's a slow movement, but that's why the importance of speaking up matters.
Truly.
Yeah. Yep. So I think Esther is one of those books that can bring to awareness the way that within the Christian family, church, obviously this is a book for folks who are Jewish, but that we should be attentive to the ways that we think, speak, talk, act. Yeah, I think it's out there, and if you see Rachel on Sunday, you can ask her. I'm sure she has. So I'll let her share her own stories, but it's and not just, yeah, it's prevalent even as a professor. These things happen. So, and not just from men either. That's the other thing to be aware of. Some of my, I know one story in particular about an older woman who came in and literally berated a younger female pastor for the way that she was dressing. And it was highly inappropriate. But it was not a male that did that, and it happens. And it wasn't like her dress was all that inappropriate. It was somebody who felt that her dresses need to be down below her ankles and things along that nature or whatever.
So that would have been an older woman then, older.
Yeah, I would say, I think it was somebody,
Older.
if I remember, it was somebody who was in their 60s who came in and was trying to help her so that she learned these things.
Oh my gosh.
That was not,
Did she say that in front of a group?
no, it was like, I don't know what day, it was like a Tuesday afternoon or something like that, just came in and like randomly just said, you need to start dressing more modestly, you're causing all sorts of issues. Whoa, it's like, yeah, this is inappropriate.
Sometimes that's true.
Well, I'll wear my muscle shirts next time.
Well, I've actually thought that when I saw young girls coming into church with short shorts,
Oh, yeah.
which might be wrong, but I just thought
Too short.
too short isn't it's not modest. It's for some other
But they're
occasion.
not pastors either, so it's
They're
two,
kids.
yeah, I mean.
Well, I meant for Sunday service,
Yeah.
or for some outside activity day, you know.
It's an interesting,
What?
It's better for them to be here.
Oh, I know,
Yes.
and I've crossed that bridge too, so.
I think it's an interesting dialogue that we continue to have in society, especially this issue always comes up around mission trips. Because, and they've gotten better, I'll say that. It's gotten better over the 10 years or so that I've been leading mission trips, but it used to be all about female clothes. And the idea was that women lead men into immorality. And it's like, men cannot control themselves. Like what is the conversation that we're telling our boys? That if women are wearing this, then it's okay to feel, act, talk around this way. And it was a huge conversation around why are we so concerned about the way our girls are dressing? And not talking about how boys can control themselves and to be, more appropriate around that. Again, the conversation I think has progressed over the years, but that certainly was the conversation when I started.
Well, that's been going on for like 50 years.
Sure.
I mean, I had this same discussion. I'll call it a discussion with my mother, you know, when the short skirts were in back in the 60s. And she would look at me and she says, "You're not leaving the house looking like that. You can't go to church like that. It's not respectful." And at
School
the
used to
time,
measure them.
well,
So
I know,
Lord.
but at the, I mean, here we are, we're talking about the way some of the girls dress in church now. And I just have, and I feel the same way now that my mother did. But I have to say, well, what's the difference? You know, what's the difference? It's all, you know, it's come full circle. And now I am my mother. You know, it's you know, it's like, haven't their mothers taught them anything?
Well, I always thought it was a respect thing, like when you're playing
Well, that's,
baseball, look like
yeah.
it. When you're
Yeah.
at church,
Yeah, you have to,
be the same. I don't know.
you dress for the occasion, and you're going to the house of God, a place to worship, and you dress accordingly.
Mhm.
And I'm
So
just now getting comfortable with the idea of being able to go to 5:30 service in jeans and a sweatshirt.
Sure.
But my husband loves it. I mean, that works for him now. So
I think it's more, a lot of these conversations are more about really thinking through kind of some of the values and systems that you were raised with. And some of those assumptions and assertions have gender or sexism or even racism, these
yeah.
types of things. They are based in something else, and they were just propagated because that's what they were taught, or and things like that. And it's not necessarily to say that all these things are bad, right? You know, there are limits and limitations that we do have on clothing and things along that nature, right? We don't want to, but at the same point in time, you have to think about how you were taught and why we're taught that way, and why we understand those types of things, and not just continue to perpetuate a system or a cycle that, again, maybe wasn't based in.
And I always tell myself, remember that passage in the Bible, judge not. that you not."
Mhm.
I find myself judging people, and I don't want to do that. And I really back away. Say, cut it out. It's not your place.
Yeah.
I got to.
Yeah, you know, these are the conversations to think more deeply about, though.
No.
Because from here on out, we don't hear about that.
Yeah, the person can do what
So I always want to bring that up because I think that's an important piece now, because we don't hear about Vashti because she wasn't sexual enough with her king. It wasn't because she wasn't smart enough. It wasn't because she wasn't.
By the time he decided to do that.
Well, sure, but I mean, it was, you know, the systems at play here are a bunch of friends told him that, you know, he can't do this anymore, and he decides to go ahead with it. And so just think about these sort of systems at play that we read about, and what kind of influence do they have as we move forward? Because again, it corresponds with the whole kind of conversation around Vashti and Me Too and things along that nature. So ultimately, we get to the spot where Esther is promoted into being queen, and Mordecai says, "Do not tell them who you really are." Right? Don't tell them don't reveal your nationality or family background. Why do you think that is?
Nobody ever likes the Jews in the Old Testament.
So, yeah, they are folks that were in exile, right?
Well, I thought this was after the exile.
Well, they were exiled into Persia. Persian king, yeah, you're right, released them, right? Now they were released in waves, though. They weren't released all at one time and said to go back. There was a group that was released and another group that was released and another group that was released. Kind of like they were brought into Babylon in waves as well. Obviously, there Mordecai and Esther are still there. Why would it be important to forbid her from revealing a nationality or family background?
Would Xerxes be threatened by having another faith or a cult in his midst and having a wife of another heritage? Other
Right.
than, is it a historical thing, a political thing?
Yeah, it could be all of those things, you know. If you think back upon other kings that were in the scriptures, what was one of the struggles that they had?
Well, they want everyone to worship them.
That they would mix, right? And then they would bring in all these other idols and gods. Right? And turns out that's what happens again in Ezra and Nehemiah. We'll find that next week, but right? This sort of concept around purity and wanting to be assembled, or just like the idea of kind of getting to be the queen was important. And so Esther moves up the roll and goes out, and Xerxes likes her, and then she becomes and so he sets the royal crown on her head, making her his queen instead of Vashti. And what better to do than to throw banquets, right? A lot of banquets, a lot of wine. And so all these people were assembled, but Mordecai was at the gates and he heard what? Dun, dun, dun.
Plot against the king.
An assassination plot against the king, right? They're gonna come after him. Mordecai tells Esther. Esther says, hey, Queen Esther says to Xerxes, this is gonna happen. And so Xerxes goes out, finds out it's true, impales him, and has it written in the book of the annals of the kingdom, right?
That was interesting.
What?
No, before you don't hear about them writing stuff down in the annals, but this, they make a special point that they wrote that down.
Write it down, yeah. Now here comes
Chiseling when you get them.
an interesting person named Haman, right? And Haman is a noble from the king's court and not aware of Esther's background or Mordecai's loyalty to the Jews. However, the Jewish tradition considers him to be a descendant of the Amalekite king Agag. Now, that's because he's a Gagite or something like that, right? He's an Agitite. And so they bring him back to Agag. Do you remember King Agag? It's in 1 Samuel, and King Agag was one of the kings that fought against King Saul. So this is now doing some of that blending back into the history, right? King Agag was an enemy, and the enemy, of course, time has gotten a lot faster. So let's keep moving. Haman, not a very good guy, dislikes Mordecai. And so he wants to destroy them all, figures out when a good time is. And anyway, they figure out they're going to kill and annihilate all of the Jewish people.
Like in 6 months.
Yeah, it's an interesting
Right.
line, right? That they line this up. And then one of the things I wanted to highlight though on 281. So Mordecai learned that it had been done. He tore his clothes, put sackcloth and ashes, and went out of the city, wept loudly and bitterly. But he went out as far as the King's Gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth is allowed to enter it in any province. There's great mourning of the Jews, fasting and weeping and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. This was an outward sign of repentance, right? You would tear the set of clothes that you have. It's not like you had a lot of clothes. You had one set of clothes usually, maybe two. And you would put on sackcloth and you would put ashes on your head as a way to repent from the things that were happening and a way to signal to the outside world that you were in a state of repentance and mourning. Ashes there. Now we have a service that's coming up in a couple weeks here, and that service is Ash Wednesday, right? We still, and I want to encourage you strongly, we have a couple things. We have a noon service, so if you're not a driver at nighter, we'd encourage you to come to that service. But we are a people who are a sacramental people. Means we don't just baptize with a promise, we use water. We don't just take communion with words of institution, but we have them attached to bread and wine. And I think while this isn't a sacrament, the ashes are not a sacrament, there's a sacramental nature that can come. As you put on ashes to your forehead or receive the ashes, you're reminded very deeply of your mortality, and also a way to enter into the season of Lent in that sort of way of just repentance, of saying that things aren't perfect in my life. And so you do that. So I want to highly encourage you to figure out which of the services you're going to come to, bring all of your family and all of your friends, and invite everybody to come and be part of Ash Wednesday service. It's an important piece of what we do as we move into Lent. And as we move into Lent, we'll start again morning prayer on Thursday mornings. In the Lenten season, we're going to do morning prayer again. So at 10 o'clock on Thursdays, we'll invite you to come in. And we'll encourage you to think through what you're going to do in Lent. So are you going to fast from something? Are you going to increase prayer? This might be a practice of coming to morning prayer. Even though it may not be the most life-giving to you, it's a discipline that you build in your own life. So coming to morning prayer and participating in it might be a part of your prayer.
Are you having morning prayer every day?
No, just on Thursdays. Yeah. And then coming on our almsgiving is the third one. Now, as Americans, we're very good at almsgiving. We have a problem, write a check, right? We're real good about doing that one. That's usually not super problematic, although, you know, we still could probably give more, think more about giving. But maybe instead of giving alms or money, maybe there's a place where you could dedicate more of your time and to think about giving away time, which is by far and away Americans' most precious resource. We do not want to give our time away. And so that might mean a number of things, right? But think about what your Lenten discipline is now as we approach it. And then on the 22nd, we start Lent. I want to encourage you to do that. It's meaningful and important time in our faith life, and I think a great time to be intentional about the things that are taking life away from us and the ways that we can look to receive life. So the more you give, the deeper you work on it, the more your life will be transformed by it.
I'll put in a plug for our Undy Sundays.
And that's a way to give.
For anyone. Yeah. This year, we're expanding it. There's also sweatshirts for the men at Faith Mission.
Yeah,
It will be in your peace signs eventually.
it is today. If you go down in peace signs, you'll see Jocelyn has made a really great website. So I want to encourage you to read it. It has all of the different things that are happening in Lent. Our mission trippers are doing a fitness class for people. They're not doing it. One of their moms, who's a certified fitness instructor for groups and private, is doing a low and no impact half-an-hour training, and then a more high interval one. And so you're invited and encouraged, and it's all free will offering, and the 100% of it will go to the mission trip. So this is a really neat way of doing that. There's the Unday Sunday or socks too, I think, right? Yep, socks, sweatshirts. There are lots of ways. There's the Lenten meals on Wednesday nights. Lots of ways to engage and increase your activity around the church on this time. So I want to keep moving because I know we're getting close to our end of our time. On page 282, as we were, Mordecai sends word back. Well, everybody's going to die. They're really sad about it. Haman is running around doing great. So Mordecai says these infamous words. Do you think that because you live in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape? Right? Do you think because of your place of privilege? I mean, there's a lot to really unpack there, as you can even think in your own faith life. What would that line be for you, that you alone would be okay, right? Because of your good works? Do you think because of you fill in the line? But for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. This is one of the places where I do like an older translation. The older translation says, for you have come into your kingdom for such a time as this. Yeah. You remember that? This conversation about when are we called to do, what are we called to do? Now, this isn't an easy faction, right? Esther enters in without having an invitation. She can be killed, right? She's putting her at risk. You can see how these Bible studies or retreats can focus around this. What's the thing that you are called to be doing that we're too scared to do? And that could be your Lenten discipline in and of itself. What is the thing that you're too scared to be doing, or too embarrassed, or too afraid, or too timid, or too whatever you want to do, whatever you want to say? Are you too ashamed to pray before your meals, even in a public setting? Right? That was a Lenten discipline for me, and now I do it everywhere. I try to do it as a public witness. So if I'm at a restaurant with you having lunch, we pray before we eat. Ask Marcia. If I, even with my family, or wherever I'm at, I pray before I eat. It's a part of my discipline of being external force of my faith, right? Is it visiting that person that annoys the bejesus out of you? Right? That person that you see coming in church, and you like, I've got to organize this over here, right? Or the person in your complex that does that maybe there's a discipline around setting forth a visitation with that person. Is it reconciliation that needs to happen? What is God calling you to in this moment? And again, the more challenging, oftentimes the more rewarding. Entering into that and understanding that all of this will happen even if you don't do it. God will continue to work in this world, right? You're not that special. It's another way of Mordecai's statement. Like, we all love to say that we are very precious and honored children in the eyes of God. Yes, that is true. And yet our God is much bigger than us and able to do all sorts of things, and will continue to work in this world to do that, right? And so she goes forward and she does all of this work. And then there's a whole lot of different things that happen. But ultimately, because we're over time, all the things get reversed. They end up not killing him. Haman gets killed. Yep. Well, they get to defend themselves. So it's a little different in the narrative. It's not that they go out and just kill people, although they do kill Haman's family, but they are permitted to defend themselves against those who would come against them. right? So it's
So
a,
was the 14th day, was that the same thing? I mean, I didn't think you were allowed to kill them except on the 13th day.
well,
But then they
maybe
came the 14th day, and
they were a little liberal with it, maybe, I don't know. So one of the things that you want to highlight here is that it's interesting. The Assyrian Empire does not exist anymore. The Babylonian Empire does not exist anymore. The Persian Empire does not exist anymore. The Roman Empire does not exist anymore. The Greek Empire does not exist anymore. But the Jewish people, they still exist. No matter what has happened in their history, and there are many times that we can point back into even modern history, that the Jewish people have been tried to exterminated or eliminated, or something has happened, they still persist, right? I think that shouldn't be lost as we read through this story of Esther. That it's not that we need to be pro-Israel, and even Jewish folks now are nervous about how Israel is turning even more right-wing in their latest elections. But it should be noted that God's provision for God's people is still there, right? And God is continuing to take care of God's people. And even with the Holocaust or any of the other things that we could point back to, here we are, we still have Jewish synagogues and things along that nature. And I think there's something there, and the book of Esther reminds us of that. And so something to ponder as you kind of move through this. All right, one more chapter. All right. Keep the chanting going. We'll see everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.